Welcome to True Crime Threads. Today we explore Linda's fatal attraction, the dark side of her love for Noah. Linda had always been the center of attention in her small town. Known for her charm, ambition, and striking beauty, she turned heads wherever she went. But while people admired her, few ever really knew her. Beneath her confident exterior lay a complex woman, driven by a need for perfection in every area of her life, especially in love. She'd dated before, but no one had ever quite measured up to her high standards or her intense need for connection. Linda wanted someone who could match her passion, who would love her as fiercely as she wanted to be loved. Everything changed when she met Noah at a friend's wedding. He wasn't like the others. Noah was a steady, grounded presence, with a quiet strength that drew people in. Where Linda was intense and focused, Noah was calm and relaxed. His kindness and gentle charm captivated her from the start. He was successful and ambitious, but without the edges of competitiveness Linda often saw in others. To her, he was perfect, exactly the man she'd been searching for. Their romance developed quickly. Linda and Noah went from casual dates to spending every weekend together. Friends and family noticed the change in Linda. She seemed happier and more settled than ever, finally matched with someone who seemed to complete her. Noah brought a balance to her life, and for a time it looked like they were the perfect pair. But while Noah saw their relationship as a healthy partnership, something deep within Linda craved more. She wanted all of him, his thoughts, his time, his attention. It was an all-consuming desire that made her feel like he was a part of her. At first, Linda's fascination with Noah seemed harmless. She would spend hours daydreaming about him, imagining their future together. She wanted to know everything about his past, his friends, his interests. But over time, her love morphed into something more intense. She began to obsess over the details, wanting to know where he was and who he was with at all times. When he wasn't around, she would replay their conversations, searching for hidden meanings in his words. She started studying his habits, his routines, even his expressions, hoping to anticipate his every need. What she saw as devotion, others would have recognized as control. Linda felt justified in her actions, convinced that her love for Noah required her to be fully involved in every aspect of his life. He was her other half, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. But as her fixation deepened, so did her need to control him, and Noah, oblivious at first, was slowly beginning to sense something was amiss. As Linda and Noah's relationship grew, her need to control every detail of their lives became more noticeable. What had started as small gestures like organizing his things or suggesting changes to his daily schedule evolved into an obsessive desire to oversee his every move. Linda would often show up unexpectedly at Noah's workplace, under the pretense of surprising him with lunch or coffee, but her visits became frequent enough that his coworkers began to notice. While Noah initially appreciated her attentiveness, he couldn't ignore the strange tension growing between them. Over time, Linda's concerns about Noah's interactions with others became constant. She began questioning his friendships, especially his relationships with female colleagues. Even brief interactions became sources of anxiety for Linda, who was convinced that any connection Noah had with someone else threatened what they shared. Her inquiries were subtle at first, casual questions that masked her growing fears. But soon her insecurities grew louder, and she would probe deeper, asking for details on conversations he'd had and trying to gauge his reactions to other people. If he mentioned a social event or a work gathering, Linda would subtly discourage him from attending, expressing worry about the effect it might have on their relationship. Noah, always the diplomat, would often give in to her wishes, believing it was a small price to pay to keep the peace. Linda's need for reassurance became relentless. She needed constant validation that Noah was committed to her, asking questions about his feelings, his thoughts on their future, and even his past relationships. The more he reassured her, the more it seemed to fuel her doubts, as if each answer only sparked more questions. Noah's gentle nature and patient attempts to reassure her only seemed to embolden her fears, making her believe that he was hiding something. The pattern became exhausting for him, and the joyful connection they once shared began to feel strained. As Noah became increasingly uneasy, he tried setting small boundaries, hoping it would ease Linda's need for control. He would ask for space, suggesting they spend time apart to reconnect with friends or pursue their own interests. Linda, however, saw his request as a threat to her carefully crafted world. She took his desire for space as evidence that he was slipping away from her. Her mind began spinning with doubts and insecurities, convinced that any distance he sought was a sign of waning affection. The idea that she could lose him filled her with a mix of panic and rage, driving her to cling to him even harder. What Linda failed to see was that her actions were pushing Noah further away, creating the very distance she feared. Her love, once a source of joy and connection, had become suffocating, leaving Noah with a growing sense of dread. She was losing sight of the man she loved, unable to see how her obsession was slowly eroding the bond between them. Linda could feel Noah slipping away, and the thought haunted her day and night. In her mind, every little action or change in his behavior became proof that he was pulling back. His calm reassurances, once enough to soothe her insecurities, now felt hollow and insincere. Linda's fears grew into a paranoia that overshadowed everything else in her life. She convinced herself that Noah was hiding something, another woman, perhaps, or a desire to leave her. With no concrete evidence, Linda's imagination filled in the blanks, twisting normal events into elaborate scenarios of betrayal. Driven by this belief, Linda began taking extreme measures. She started tracking his whereabouts, monitoring his online activity, and even scrolling through his social media to check for any signs of infidelity. At first, she justified her actions as a way to protect their relationship, convincing herself that if she just found out the truth, she could confront him and salvage what they had. But her actions spiraled further, and soon Linda was no longer just looking for signs of betrayal, she was fabricating them. She would scrutinize his text messages, going so far as to examine timestamps and read into casual phrases that, to her, seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Small things, like a delayed response or a missed call, became unforgivable offenses in her mind. To gain further insight, Linda resorted to hiring a private investigator to follow Noah, desperate for any proof that would confirm her suspicions. But when the investigator came back empty-handed, telling her that there was no sign of wrongdoing, Linda refused to accept it. She began to believe that Noah was simply skilled at hiding his tracks, growing more fixated on uncovering a betrayal that likely didn't exist. Her frustration mounted as she searched for answers, pushing her to delve even deeper into his life. She would confront him with cryptic questions and insinuations, trying to catch him in a lie, but Noah was always calm, responding with honesty and patience. However, Noah's genuine responses only fueled Linda's suspicion. She thought his calmness was a cover, a practiced response that allowed him to lie convincingly. His attempts to reassure her had become meaningless. Linda's mind had constructed a reality that no amount of logic could penetrate. This obsession wore Noah down. He felt cornered, suffocated by her accusations and desperate for relief from the endless cycle of mistrust. At last, realizing he could no longer handle Linda's relentless questioning and paranoia, Noah told her he needed space. He suggested a break, hoping it would give her time to reflect and perhaps recognize how her behavior was affecting him. Linda, however, took his request as a confirmation of her fears. In her mind, the man she loved was rejecting her, and her heartbreak quickly transformed into resentment. The very thing she feared, losing him, seemed inevitable, yet she couldn't stop herself from spiraling deeper into her fixation. Her thoughts grew darker as she convinced herself that if she couldn't have Noah fully, no one else should. Linda was shattered by Noah's decision to take a break. In her mind, it wasn't just a temporary separation, it was abandonment, betrayal, the loss of everything she had built with him. Desperation filled the void left by his absence, and her heartbreak quickly mutated into a darker obsession. Linda became fixated on winning him back, convinced that if she just found the right approach, she could make him return to her. But beneath this hope lurked an even more disturbing thought: if she couldn't bring him back into her life, she would do everything in her power to make sure he never moved on. Linda's mind raced with schemes to regain Noah's attention, each one more elaborate than the last. She started creating small crises, pretending to need help with things only Noah could supposedly solve, from fixing an emergency with her car to claiming she'd lost something of great sentimental value and only he could help find it. She wanted to remind him of the bond they once shared, hoping these situations would reignite his affection for her. But Noah saw through her attempts and remained distant, politely declining her pleas or referring her to others for help. Each rejection deepened her sense of anger and betrayal. Unable to draw him back, Linda's fixation turned vengeful. She began stalking him, following his every move with a chilling dedication. She would drive past his apartment late at night, hoping to catch glimpses of him and any sign that he was seeing someone else. Every parked car, every light in his window, and every unfamiliar face in his life became a source of paranoia. Linda was no longer trying to win him back. Instead, she was consumed by a desire to disrupt any semblance of peace he might have found without her. Linda took her obsession even further, sending him anonymous messages and leaving cryptic notes designed to unsettle him. She would leave small reminders of their time together, old photos, handwritten notes from better days, and mementos he'd forgotten about in places she knew he would find them. The items seemed innocent enough, but to Noah they felt like a haunting. Linda's grip on reality was slipping, and these actions only solidified his decision to keep his distance. But Linda interpreted his lack of response as a challenge, a final test of her devotion. In her mind, she was fighting to save the love they shared, convinced that if he felt the intensity of her emotions, he would realize that no one else could love him the way she did. She no longer cared about boundaries, privacy, or even Noah's sense of safety. She was determined to make her presence known. Her own sense of self had become intertwined with him to the point where she couldn't imagine a life where he wasn't central to her existence. As her fixation darkened, Linda's thoughts turned toward revenge. She reasoned that if Noah was able to move on without her, it would mean that everything they'd shared was meaningless. The idea that he could be happy with someone else was unbearable. Her actions became less about love and more about punishment. Linda was willing to go to any lengths, her actions now controlled by the fear of irrelevance and a sense of betrayal that consumed her entirely. The woman she once was bright, ambitious, and admired was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't let go, even if it meant destroying the life she'd hoped to build with him. Linda's obsession had reached a breaking point, and Noah's increasing distance only fanned the flames of her rage. She felt trapped in a twisted version of love, where every rejection, every silent moment from Noah only reinforced her belief that he was betraying her. Her thoughts became consumed with the idea that if she couldn't have him, no one else would. The man she once adored had become an object of obsession, and the love she once felt for him had transformed into a suffocating, uncontrollable anger. One evening, Linda saw Noah at a local cafe, sitting across from a woman she didn't recognize. He was laughing, his eyes bright with a joy that had always been reserved for her. The sight of him so carefree with someone else shattered her fragile sense of control. In that moment, Linda was overwhelmed with a violent jealousy that seemed to erase any remnants of rational thought. She watched them for hours, fixating on every shared smile, every touch, each moment that solidified her fear that Noah was moving on without her. To Linda, it was the ultimate betrayal. The idea of him loving someone else drove her to the brink of madness. The rage inside Linda built to an unbearable crescendo. She convinced herself that Noah had been playing her all along, stringing her along with empty promises and false affection. The very love she had once believed was mutual now felt like a cruel game he had played on her heart. She didn't know how to stop the spiral of emotions consuming her. Her heart raced with the thought of confronting him, of making him understand just how deeply she had been hurt. But confronting him wasn't enough. Her anger demanded more. She no longer wanted him to see the life they could have had. She wanted him to feel the pain she now lived with every single day. In a final, tragic act, Linda took matters into her own hands. Fueled by a mixture of heartbreak, jealousy, and obsession, she did something that would change everything. The details of that night are still unclear, but what is known is that Linda crossed a line from which there would be no return. She left the cafe, her mind racing, her emotions clouding her judgment. When she returned home, she made a decision that sealed the fate of their relationship, as well as her own future. When Noah was found, it was clear that he had suffered the consequences of Linda's unrelenting obsession. His loved ones were left to pick up the pieces, trying to understand how the woman they once thought of as strong, intelligent, and full of potential had fallen so far into darkness. Linda, now facing the harsh reality of her actions, was arrested. The town was left in shock, unable to reconcile the woman they knew with the one who had committed such an irreversible act of violence. Linda's story became a chilling warning about the destructive nature of unchecked obsession, about the dangerous path that can be paved when love turns into an all-consuming desire for control. What started as a passionate romance had ended in tragedy, a tragic reminder of how one person's inability to let go can destroy not only their own life, but the lives of everyone around them.